Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. Thank you for joining us. I hope that you and your families are doing okay in these difficult times that the world is going through. My name is Carlos Duran, and I'm excited to be hosting this webinar. I would like to give a couple more minutes for those participants that were not able to join the webinar yet. And while we wait, let me give you a bit of information about our company. On Strategy is a consulting company focused on the creation of value through the formulation and implementation of business strategies. To that end, we develop and implement customized solutions addressing the particular needs of our clients. Our areas of expertise include process automation, development of technology solutions, and also taking care of the human aspects in the implementation of business transformation initiatives. We have clients in many different industry sectors and also in the public sector. Our headquarters for North America are located in Miami, Florida, and we also have a regional office in Mexico City. We like to think of ourselves as a global company, having developed projects in a number of different countries. Okay, the majority of the attendees have joined, so let's start with the content. Before we start discussing strategy planning and execution, I believe it is important to have a common understanding of what we mean by one term and the other. In occasions, strategy planning and strategy execution are used interchangeably. However, strategy planning and execution are fundamentally different. In line with the quote that I have included here, strategy planning is about deciding what to do, whereas execution is about getting it done. I would like to propose this as our working definition. Both the capacity to plan and execute strategies are essential skills for a modern leader. Strategy planning and execution have been continuously evolving, and new approaches and methodologies have been and are still being developed. Today, I will discuss with you some proven methodologies and also present new trends and state-of-the-art approaches in the field. If you have any questions or comments, please send them to us using the chat section of the webinar. In traditional strategic planning thinking, strategy planning and execution were seen as two very different activities. As a matter of fact, it was common to see in organizations strategy planning units with no responsibility whatsoever over the execution of the plans that they have designed. An evolution of this way of thinking was the idea that Drs. Kaplan and Norton introduced with the concept of the Office of Strategy Management that we will discuss in more detail in a few minutes. The main mandate of this office is to ensure that the strategies are executed. In the early 2000s, however, companies that had been operating in more or less stable environments started to face a new reality where more frequent and profound changes in the business environment became the new norm. In this scenario, strategy can no longer be a piece done in isolation, after which execution occurs. Strategy and execution have to work together. Strategy execution must be a process from which lessons about the strategy are learned, and with this input, the strategy is refined. Strategy has become a continuous learning process informed by execution. In addition to this, strategy must be created and implemented much faster. Of course, the key steps in strategy planning, like examine the market, check the context, test the environment, still are relevant. But the idea is to take some action and see if your ideas are working or not, in the form of pilot projects, for instance, and then revise them in an agile fashion. It is clear that to achieve results, Companies need not only to have a sound strategy, but also the ability to execute it. However, a number of studies that started in the late 90s identified that very well-formulated strategies fail to deliver results due to poor execution. Recent studies confirmed that companies still struggle with strategy execution. McKinsey research tells us, for example, that 70% of change efforts fall short of desired results, and Harvard Business Review that 67% of well-formulated strategies fail due to poor execution. These studies show that strategy execution still remains a key challenge that companies face, and this has become even more critical in view of the turbulent and rapidly changing business environment that requires from companies the ability to formulate, execute, and adapt quickly. The strategy execution approach that we will discuss today is an adaptation of the strategy execution framework created by Drs. Kaplan and Norton, the execution premium model. This model has proven to be one of the most robust strategy execution frameworks, and it is widely used in private and public sector organizations around the world. It has evolved from being a measurement system to become an all-encompassing strategy management framework, thanks to the learnings gained after thousands of implementations in organizations from every industry sector and in very diverse geographies. The robustness of the model lies in the integration of key principles of strategy management in a very simple way that can be both easily implemented and communicated and integrated with other management tools. In this simplified view of the framework, we can see the four main components. First one, develop the strategy. Second, plan the strategy. Third, align the strategy. And finally, test and adapt. In the following slides, I will walk you through each one of these components. Before we start diving deeper into the framework, I believe it will be useful to have a common understanding about what strategy is. There are a zillion definitions out there, and for that reason, I would like to share with you our point of view and propose a working definition. In our view, strategy is an integrated set of choices that position an organization in an ecosystem to earn superior value over the long term. What is new in this definition is the incorporation of the word ecosystem. This is a major shift in strategic planning thinking. The idea being that strategy is not formulated thinking only of the organization, but of the organization as part of an ecosystem and working together with different stakeholders. With the definition of strategy in mind, let's talk about the first element in the framework, develop strategy. The strategy formulation process starts by defining the organization's mission. That answers the question, what is our purpose? The next question to answer is, what do we want to achieve? And that is our vision. And then we work on the values. What do we believe in? Once the organization defines those elements, the next step is to conduct an environmental scan to identify key trends, opportunities, key issues, or threats that can either help or hamper the organization from achieving its vision. This is a very iterative process where the organization tests how realistic the high-level objectives are in relation to the internal and external environments. The following step in the process is to define how the organization will get there. That is, the organization has to make the strategic choices that we discuss when we define what a strategy is. This is the strategy formulation stage. There are many different approaches and frameworks that organizations can use to help them formulate their strategies. For illustration purposes, We will explore some of them later on. The strategic thinking is constantly evolving. There are a series of ideas that have emerged as a response to the new challenges posed by the digital age, which are very different from the ones of the industrial age, characterized by more predictable and stable environments. The first idea I'd like to share with you is the notion of changing the company's focus by changing a fundamental question that companies in the industrial age usually ask themselves in the early stages of their strategy formulation process. The classical question, in what business are you in? In a digital world, the notion of industries, competitors, and customers are changing dramatically. And for that reason, the question that companies need to ask themselves is, what is the problem that we are trying to solve? Think for a moment about the implications of finding an answer to this question instead of the former. In classical strategy planning, one of the most common analyses that companies performed was the industry analysis using tools such as Porter's 5 Forces. Today, very few environments remain classical. In the industrial age, companies are competing with organizations within their industry only. In the digital age, you are competing with any other organization capable of providing value to your customers in any step of your value chain. For that reason, it is key to look for trends outside your industry boundaries and understand how those trends can impact your organization. The one-size-fits-all approach to strategy planning, where one company can choose from more or less fixed set of approaches to successfully compete, is dead. The new reality demands from the organizations to use a combination of approaches simultaneously. Maybe one focus on the core business and another one to test and experiment with different products and services outside the core, perhaps at a small scale. The 3 to 5 years strategy planning cycle that was commonly used in the majority of organizations doesn't make sense anymore in view of the much more frequent and drastic changes in the environment. And finally, most leaders, especially the ones coming from successful industrial era companies, fail to understand the importance of ecosystems simply because they are hardwired to think in a different way. To illustrate the point, let me show you an example. An ecosystem is a network of organizations and individuals exchanging goods and information in order to create value and ultimately to ensure mutual survival. Let's consider, for example, the case of Ionity, a joint venture created by BMW, Daimler, Ford, Volkswagen, Audi, and Porsche that have joined forces to create the largest network of high-power charging stations for electric vehicles in Europe. Some of these companies are direct competitors, and despite of that, they are working together to drive this strategic initiative that will benefit all of them in the long term. The mindset required to identify and pursue this type of opportunities are very different from the ones that were successful in the industrial age. There are 3 key elements that any modern strategy must include: technology, environment, and society. Even though these are not new, and many companies have been already considering them in their strategy planning exercises, what is new is the increasing importance that they have. Technology has shifted from being a support function to actually drive the strategy. And with regards to environmental and societal considerations, many organizations have been doing a fantastic work for a number of years already, but what has changed is that those topics that typically were not aligned with the core business and were running in parallel, separated from the business, are starting to play a central role in core business strategies. The public and investors are starting to scrutinize more closely what the companies are doing in relation to those topics, and investors are making investing decisions based on those topics, which in turn impact the value of the companies as well as their capacity to have access to sources of financing, for instance, just to mention only some of the potential impacts. There are several tools that you can use to conduct environmental scanning. Here are some of them. Pest trend analysis, Porter strike forces, and value chain analysis were widely used in the industrial era. And scenario planning, wargaming, and ecosystem mapping are very powerful tools to deal with more unpredictable, unstable environments. The recommendation in choosing the tool or combination of tools to help you in your environmental scanning efforts is to select the ones that provide relevant information for strategic decision making for your particular case. The first step to focus the analysis is to clarify what are the key questions that you need to answer. Once again, I'd like to stress the importance of looking within and outside the industry boundaries. Let's talk now about some approaches for strategy formulation. Once the organization has a clear view about where it wants to go and has understood the environmental challenges and opportunities, the next step is to define how to get there. There are a series of tools that can help organizations formulate a strategy. Here are some of them. The list below is by no means exhaustive. Let's start with the first one, Blue Ocean Strategy. The main idea is to create a new market where there is no competition by adding value and reducing costs simultaneously of the products or services that we deliver. Business Model Canvas. This tool encompasses strategy planning and execution elements. The main components of the canvas are the definition of products or services, the value proposition, the channels that the company will use to communicate and deliver the value proposition, the definition of the type of relationship with the customers, the main activities that the company should perform, the resources that they need, the key partners, the cost structure, and the revenue streams. Profit from the core. The central idea is how to create new businesses, perhaps completely different from the core one, by using a core competency that the company has. A good example of this would be Amazon, that is using the enormous IT capabilities that have developed to support its main e-commerce business to provide services such as cloud computing, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Co-creation. The idea of this methodology is to create products and services working together with the clients. Design thinking. In this approach, products and services are developed starting with a clear understanding of the customer needs. Judo strategy. This tool proposes to use the capacity to react more quickly to customers' needs and in this way capture value that otherwise will be provided by larger organizations. Ecosystem strategy. The idea is to work together with different stakeholders in the ecosystem to create more value for each member than any one organization operating alone could, and at the same time benefiting all the members in the ecosystem. Disruptive innovation. The idea is to create a new market and value network starting with low-end and less demanding customers. Okay, let's explore now the next component in our strategy execution framework, plan the strategy. As discussed at the beginning of the webinar, to achieve results, organizations need both strategy planning and executing capabilities. Typically, business schools don't teach a lot about strategy execution. They teach a lot about strategy. The first formal strategy execution model was the one created by Drs. Kaplan and Norton, the Balanced Scorecard. Over the years, this model has proven to be one of the most widely used strategy management tools worldwide. The framework that evolved to become the Execution Premium Framework addresses the principal barriers to strategy execution, which are poor communication of the strategy, lack of alignment, lack of strategic governance, and lack of oversight. Let's explore the main components of the framework. Very often, strategic plans yield complex and in many occasions difficult to understand documents, especially for non-expert audiences, which, by and large, are the majority of the core workers in the organizations. If you try to implement a new strategy, usually the first question that arises is, how do I explain this to the peeps? So, the first step in executing a strategy is to translate complex strategic documents into very few and clear objectives that are easy to understand and to communicate. Once the strategic objectives have been identified, the next step is to build a strategy map. A strategy map is a graphical representation of the business strategy containing the vital few strategic objectives organized in different perspectives and using a cause and effect relationship. The logic is that in order to achieve the objectives at the top, the company has to achieve the objectives that were identified as drivers. For instance, in this example, to achieve revenue growth, we need to understand our customers and what do we do that creates value for them, which is our value proposition. And then we need to identify what are the processes that create and deliver that value proposition. Once we identify those processes, the next question is, what are the skills and information that our people need to excel at those processes? The strategy map provides a comprehensive view of the organization's strategy. The next step in the development of the model is the identification of performance indicators, targets, and initiatives that are necessary to implement in order to close the performance gap. Strategy is executed through investments in building capabilities. The elements described make up the balanced scorecard that will provide the key inputs for monitoring the implementation, for learning, and adapt the strategy. At the beginning of this section, we mentioned that one of the barriers for effective strategy execution was the lack of monitoring and oversight. To address this barrier, the methodology proposes a structured and disciplined approach to review the strategy that includes all the processes required to prepare and execute those strategy review meetings. Now, a word of caution. Companies that were using this approach in the industrial era typically conducted quarterly strategy review meetings. However, in view of the changes in the business environment that we talked about earlier, the new best practice suggests that executives should increase the time they spend on a strategy together to at least match the time they spend together on operating issues. This probably means meeting for 2 to 4 hours weekly or every 2 weeks throughout the year. Another important aspect of strategy execution is how strategic risks are going to be identified and managed. Strategic risks are different from the operational ones and require a different system to manage them. The starting point for identifying the strategic risks and creating strategic risk performance indicators is the strategy map. It is also necessary to create a forum to make decisions about strategic risks. Some organizations take advantage of a strategy review meeting structure to review and make decisions about strategic risks. The system that we have described so far doesn't run by itself. To address this barrier, Drs. Kaplan and Norton create a new concept, the Office of Strategy Management, that is responsible for managing all aspects of strategy execution. This function is key to sustaining the strategy management system and has three main roles: manage the performance and processes required to implement the strategy, ensure coordination and alignment of processes that belong to multiple areas, and leads the execution of the processes required to implement the strategy. The two words that most organizations mention as the reason why the execution premium works are focus and alignment. The focus is on the strategy, not on short-term financial results. If the only management system that you have is the corporate budget, that is your focus, short-term benefits. But if your focus is on the strategy, now you're focusing on something very different, more long-term. The key is how to align organizational units, people, and resources to the strategy. And according to the trends that we have discussed earlier, also how to align other stakeholders in the ecosystem. No strategy is executed exactly as planned, and it is important to be aware of this because bosses are not going to be with the employees all the time. In the heat of the operations, employees need to be able to take initiative and make their own decisions. For that reason, it is key that every employee knows what the company is trying to achieve. What are the strategic objectives that he or she is contributing to? In other words, when the things deviate from the plans, enable employees to make decisions and find ways to achieve results, having always in mind the strategic objectives of the organization. As mentioned before, no strategy is going to work exactly as you plan, so you need to continuously monitor it. There are two reasons why you might want to change your strategy. The first reason is that things might have changed from the time you formulated your strategy. For instance, a significant event that was not anticipated might trigger to fundamentally change the strategy. The second reason is that we might have selected the wrong strategy. Within the cause and effect logic of our strategy, we can see if our hypotheses are valid or not by using actual data. For instance, I could have assumed that if I spend more time with my clients, I'll increase customer satisfaction, and that in turn, it will lead to more sales. Once I implement the strategy and I have data, I can see if that strategy was correct or not. If we need to change the strategy, then we go back to the strategy formulation stage and start over the cycle. Data is key to monitor and test the strategy, and new technologies are making it simpler to analyze data for decision making. It is worth mentioning that other tools that we use in the strategy formulation can also be used to test strategic hypotheses. Tools like scenario planning and wargaming, for instance. Okay, with this we have briefly covered the main elements of our strategy management framework. Let's summarize now the key takeaways. Here are the key takeaways. Strategy planning and execution are essential capabilities that organizations need in the digital age. The tools and methodologies to be used should address the challenges of the digital age, not the ones of the industrial age. Strategy needs to be managed. The organizations must develop the internal capabilities to do so. The frequency of strategic reviews should be aligned with the degree of change that your organization is facing. Once again, think not only within your industry boundaries. Data is the new oil, as someone said. Make intensive use of data to help you formulate and execute your strategy. Okay, we have reached the end of today's webinar. During the presentation, we have received several questions that we will be answering in the coming days. This webinar has been recorded. We'll send you a link with a copy of the recording in the next few days. If you want to get in touch with us, please send us an email and one member of our team will be happy to contact you. Stay healthy and safe. I hope to see you again in another webinar of our series. Bye-bye.